Hello, my name is Cece Garrett, and I'm a clinical social worker in Washington State, and I specialize in the treatment of hoarding disorder. One of the things I offer to website visitors is this opportunity to ask me anything about hoarding. And today I'm here responding to a question I recently received. It's a great question about emotional attachment to objects. So my website visitor submitted the question: how does a person who hoards reconcile their emotional attachment to objects with their simultaneous neglect and failure to provide upkeep of those same objects? Is there no urge to take care of the things that are loved? And I think it's a really great question. And in fact, I think that one of the misunderstandings is that when we talk about emotional attachment and hoarding disorder, that it means necessarily this idea of love and care the way it means what it means to most of us. In fact, one of the things that's common for individuals who hoard is that they have a sense of attachment based on owning, possessing, and not necessarily with the using of and engaging. An example of this would be somebody who has lots of fat quarters and quilt batting, has a quilting machine even, but has yet to make or finish a quilt. And yet they, by merit of owning the materials that are required for making a quilt, believe that they're a great quilter. So they're not actually quilting, but because they own the possessions, they have the intent and ability to quilt, though they're not doing it, that they have that identity. So emotional attachment within hoarding is a little bit distorted, which we see some early research about attachment styles, disorganized attachment, anxious attachment. And so when we talk about emotional attachment, it isn't necessarily that same kind of love and care that we might think of in a secure attachment way. So what does that mean? That means that they have things and they possess it. And we see this in some parents. Like we see parents who have many children and believe that they are a great parent, but they don't actually take a lot of time and care and interest in their children, and yet they still believe that they are in fact a good parent. So it's kind of just a function of this, that their emotional attachment to possessions looks different than emotional attachment in somebody who has healthy, secure attachment with people and or things. So that's a really big piece that's misunderstood. Emotional attachment also really is around the idea of letting go, and that they have very significant attachments. This reminds me, this is important, this is something that I need to be in control of, I need to be responsible for. And so their emotionality isn't always this warm, fuzzy feeling, but emotional reasoning about how they own and possess the item. So what does that mean? Well, a lot of people acquire their possessions because they're bored, they've had a bad day, um, they're looking for something to give them that dopamine kick that new acquisition brings, right? That a lot of people recognize this. This is why when we've had a bad day, we stop by somewhere, and if you're a female, perhaps that you bought some lipstick, or you get some new shoes, or you know there's lots of ways where we can go to retail therapy. And and then when we get home, if you have hoarding behaviors, you've gotten those things, you now own them, you possess them, but there isn't necessarily the ability to use and engage with them. But we now have this, owning and having, and that's where the emotional attachment begins. It's not a secure attachment to the item that would allow them to engage with the items. It's that disorganized, insecure, anxious attachment. And so the pervasive, I'm not sure I'm good enough, doubts about self and ability to engage with their belongings and the world is still an issue. And that can be across a spectrum, right? A lot of people have the emotional attachment of what the items are worth, not necessarily the item itself, but the idea of what the item represents. And if we're attached to an idea, we don't have to engage and care for the item if we're attached to the idea instead of what it represents. It's a great question. Again, emotional attachment, when we talk about it in hoarding disorder, isn't necessarily warm, fuzzy care for an item, but it could be that the item has triggered a positive or negative emotional response. And now we possess it. We get a sense of identity from our possessing, not necessarily utilization. And so it becomes emotionally challenging to make decisions, to let it go, release it. And so that's what that emotional attachment we talk about in hoarding. Yes, it's very common that people with emotional attachment and hoarding have multiple items that they don't care for, and in some cases are actually destroyed because of a lack of care. It's very common, and it's a really great question. And I hope this helps you understand that term emotional attachment when we're talking about it in scope of hoarding disorder. If you're watching this and you have a question, I've got my link down below in the box, and you can submit your Ask Me Anything about hoarding question. I'd love to answer it. Thanks so much for this question. I look forward to hearing more.